All right, finally, fasting. Fasting. So one of the final practices or disciplines or rhythms that helps us fight against the barriers that would keep us from actually becoming like Jesus, the barriers that keep us from interacting and viewing and engaging with our world and everything in it like Jesus would. One of the most powerful things is fasting. Fasting. Fasting is abstaining from food for spiritual purposes. Abstaining from food for spiritual purposes. Now, real quick, I think that it is important to distinguish there's a difference between fasting and abstaining. And even, as a church here, we'll say fasting, and then the people in our church will automatically think of a couple things, right? Like, fast from this and this and this and this. So in its pure sense, fasting is abstaining from food specifically, but there also is abstaining, which is also really helpful. Okay, the Bible specifically addresses fasting as the removal of food. However, we need to abstain for more than just food because of our culture. So the reality is, the first century Jew, Jesus, did not have to worry about social media, cable news, Netflix, sports, music, and all other forms of entertainment and distraction. So, like fasting for food, right? That was for them. It was like that was the most consistent, prevalent, prominent thing that could help usher them into the presence of God. For us, fasting from food still should be a part of our habits and rhythms, but there also should be abstaining as well. Abstaining from other things that would remove barriers, create space so that we can experience the presence of God in a new way. As 21st century followers of Jesus, fasting and abstaining need to be part of life rhythms. So the goal of fasting is to, in essence, starve the flesh so that we can feed the spirit. Right? We are acknowledging through fasting that we are not just flesh, that we are also spirit. So we are starving the flesh to then keep going back to feeding the spirit. So because that's not our no one has to tell you, hey, eat something today. Eat something today. You go long enough and you're like, whoa, I need to eat something. But it's hard to know that also our spirit needs to be fed. We need to feed our spirit. So starve the flesh, feed the spirit. So the purpose of fasting, I think you have an image or a graphic there. Here's kind of the rhythm if you want to think about it in regards to fasting. There is this significant moment, okay, which then leads to fasting, abstaining from food for a spiritual purpose, which then leads us to God's presence, a greater awareness and acknowledgement of his presence and what he's doing and how he's moving and grooving in this world or in your life or in your family or in your church or in your community. Significant moment, fasting, God's presence. So a significant moment occurs like a crisis or maybe a start of a new year, which is how a lot of us experience fasting, the start of a new year. Maybe there's a deep encounter with God. There's this moment where it's like, I have this encounter with God, this revelation or this experience, and so now I'm going to go into fasting. Or maybe there's even a sensing of something new, sensing of something on the horizon, something that is coming, and you're like, hey, something's coming. I don't know what it is. I want to be ready. I want to know, God, what your heart is. I want to see what you see. I'm going to fast so that I am able to experience more of your presence in what you're doing. Fasting is not a formula, which is where I get to real quick. Fasting is not need plus fasting equals God does what I want. And man, I so quickly get there. I need this thing, God. I need this thing. And it may even be a good thing. But okay, I have a need, I'm going to fast, and God, you are obligated to do what I want. It's not what it is. This is called spiritual manipulation. This is actually where we, in a weird way, think we are actually God. Using a spiritual discipline, really any of the spiritual disciplines, in hopes of coaxing or coercing God to do as we please is not the purpose of it. It is to help shape and form us into the likeness of Jesus, to understand the heart and the mind and the will of the Father, to understand the voice of the Spirit, and to jump in stream and jump in line what he's doing, to see with greater clarity and recognition how he is moving, and to get on board with that. That's what fasting helps us do. Fasting is an invitation to set aside comforts and seek more of God's presence and his kingdom. Fasting. Okay, so we went through 4 of these, and it's a lot there. There's a lot there. The worst thing you could do is to leave this room and be like, okay, starting today, all 4 of those are now. Let's go. Today, I'm going to, first of all, no more food today, and then I'm going to Sabbath, which means I need to take a day off. But while I Sabbath, I'm going to start to think about my past and all my trauma. But I'm going to be alone, and then I don't know what to do, but I'm hungry, and so I'm going to be angry, and I'm going to start hitting things, and everything falls apart. It's like, no. And so, where do you start? Start small. Start small. Take one of these things, and then a small aspect or a shift of one of these things, and begin to implement it. All right? Maybe pick simplicity. Be like, simplicity. Man, yeah, I feel like I got this, like I got to hoard, I got more, or I feel so overwhelmed by how much stuff I have, or possessions, or clothes. Start going through and like saying, hey, I don't need this, I don't need this, I don't need this. Or maybe fasting. Maybe start fasting a meal a day. Or maybe Sabbath. Start like, okay, man, 24 hours? Wow. Let me try 4 hours. Just 4 hours. Can I get 4 hours where I intentionally do things that brings me into worship and brings me into to rest and to joy and to peace. Just start small. Start small. Next, ask God, because I believe he will, ask God to reveal which cultural assumptions are woven into your way of life. I think that's the problem. I think we, myself included, walk around not realizing how much we actually have been shaped and formed by our culture. We walk around and we engage and interact with things like entertainment or politics, things like money and possessions. And we don't realize that it's been shaped and formed by the world around us, and it's become this ceiling or this cap that's kept us from really living the abundant life and freedom in Christ. And so ask God to reveal, God, what are those things? And it's easier to see them in other people. We know that, right? We see them all the time, especially in light of the season the last couple of years in our country and in our culture and in our church. It's like, whoa, do you see? Like, that's not what following Jesus is about, but they're here in us too. So God, would you search me, know my heart, reveal in me where I've been so shaped and formed like the culture. And then just be ruthlessly critical of the things that you digest and you intake, right? Because they can become the cap that prevents you from being a disciple of Jesus. And then next, finally, pursue one with significant intention for a period of time. I remember when we took a group of people, the residents, a couple of years back, we would talk about one of these. So I remember we would talk about silence and solitude, or we'd talk about Sabbath, and then I would say, okay, now go intentionally practice it this coming week. And then the next week we'd come back and we would talk about it, and they're like, that was horrible. I hated it. That sucked. I'm like, okay, now keep going, right? And then inevitably what ends up happening is you do begin to learn and change and shift and realize, wow, this actually is doing something, but it took me a while to get there. And so find one of them and then really say, I'm going to go after this one. I'm going to devote significant time and attention and energy to do this one over this period of time. And then guess what? It becomes a rhythm. It becomes a habit. There was a season when making the bed, I had to discipline myself because I knew that it would speak love to Casey, right? So I would it was just like this conscience or conscious, intentional. I had to okay, I will make the bed. I don't want to, but I will make the bed. Why do we have all these extra pillows? I will make the bed, okay? And at first, it was so bad, it hurt me. It hurt me to make the bed emotionally. But I did it because I love my wife. And then over time, it's become a more rhythm, a greater rhythm. The problem is, I think Casey recognizes it's a rhythm now, and she's like, well, here's something else that will show me your love for me. I'm like, dang it. But it's a rhythm. So find one thing, intentional focus, intentionality for a season, then wisely move on to the next one. Not that you would stop that one, right? Because now it's part of your rhythm, but then say, okay, now I want to move on to another one. And watch what God will do as we begin to see the world with a new lens. We begin to engage and interact with the things of our culture and the cultural assumptions differently. We begin to actually become like Jesus. And then, as we'll hear about next week, we begin to do what Jesus did and build his kingdom with the power and the presence of God. And so I'm excited to jump into that next week.